Anna, lovely to meet you. And my name's Mike, and we're here to talk about materials and especially paper. Really, we want to introduce everybody to using better materials. For the long run, your artwork will last so much better. So we have different examples, good and bad, that can be used here, really. Anna, you work as a paper conservator.
I do.
So
yes.
Tell us just a wee bit about that.
So paper conservation is to help preserve the paper and artworks and anything, letters, drawings, watercolors. And what we see in my practice is that the best quality paper, stored well, lasts the longest.
Yes.
And using poor quality materials inherently makes things very
yes. Temporary.
Temporary, yes.
Yeah, they don't last as long. I mean, we're both trained as printmakers. You were saying you went to Grays, I went to college down south, and printmaking paper, quite often we use paper that's made from cotton rather than wood pulp. It's the lignin in the wood pulp that makes the chemical reaction. So if the classic thing is if you put a newspaper on your windowsill, in the next few days it will discolor enormously. It just shows you how much acid is held in that paper. We've got some here. It's just nice to look at a variety of papers that can be used, and you can see from an ordinary cartridge you can actually probably hear it, the crackle that it makes. It tells you it's very stiff, that there's loads and loads of glue that's on the surface. So if you were to print on there, the ink doesn't really go into the paper. It sort of sits on top, and it might give you a sheen that may or may not be needed for your piece of work, really. Instead of this, which is a much thicker paper, but as you can hear, it's much, much softer. This one is called Arch 88. It has very little size, if any. So if we were to put water on this, and we may do that a little bit later, it puckers up, it blisters up, it soaks in. So if you put it into a bath of water, it would soak right down to the bottom. So this one never gets soaked, whereas some of the others you would soak, especially if you're doing like an etching or so, but you can use them for screen prints and other processes as well. But you've got some lovely Japanese paper there.
I do. So there's some Japanese, Chinese, and Korean papers. They've been making paper for thousands of years and have very good methods and use very good quality fibers. So kozo or gampi or mulberry, and the fibers are pure cellulose. So like the rag paper, like the cotton papers of printmaking, these are very good quality and last, and of various shades. And here there's some lignin-based papers that have aged slightly differently. So they're both old, so there's some discoloration on the edges, but this one you can see has discolored, and that's just its kind of internal, the lignin. Whereas,
and that's just like you said, that's the wood pulp.
Yes, the wood pulp paper.
Yeah.
Yes.
And these Japanese papers, they're so thin, but the fibers are incredibly long. So it knits together like a piece of material, the weft and weave of it, makes it incredibly robust to use, even though it's what, a quarter of the weight of a piece of typing paper or something, even more so. So yeah. You get some papers which are very lovely, and you know the quality has gone into it because you can get some watermarks. This one is called Hanamuller. I don't know if you can catch that. There's a watermark on that paper. It's a little image of a cockerel. Hanamuller.
Can I show it from underneath?
Yeah. Oh yes. That's good. And it shows you, it's a great idea that Anna's got with the light. It actually shows you the texture of the paper, because you can also play around with that. This is lovely to draw on. If you've got a soft paper pencil, it'd be really good to draw on. Yeah. There's other paper that can be used. This one is a Somerset Satin, and satin is just referring to its surface. So it's a very, very smooth one. Compared to the Hahnemuller, you can see that there's hardly any fibres. What's happened with this paper, it's been hot pressed. So when they make the paper, it goes through a big roller, which is heated, and basically it's ironing out any of the pulp that is sitting there. So it's really nice and smooth to use. It's a great paper to work on, and it's really nice, but also various colours that can be used as well, greys and browns and what have you. And you have some other paper there, do you?
These ones, well, these are just some boards. These are some boards that we use in conservation. So everything we use in conservation is high quality and inert, so it won't change with age, unlike wood pulp papers. So there's sort of some fluted archival board, which is blue, but it's sort of a blue that is a safe and okay blue. And then these are some mount boards that are acid-free, lignin-free, and the cores are the same as the facing papers, so they won't discolor or change with age or light.
So that's fantastic. So if somebody is preparing their work, and especially if they're selling it for a good price, of course you would want to put a mount on it, and so those materials would be the ones for the job. I think we've all seen lovely images, and the mounts, if it's a window mount, the edge of that paper can easily go yellow in time, and I think we've all been guilty of it, or we've all used that. I mean, it's all right to say about using all this material, but once you're starting out, you do have a budget to work to, and that can be quite tricky, really. That you just have to remind people it's worth, if you can, to spend an extra few pounds and get the right materials. Makes all the difference.
Yes, especially for items or prints that you want to be finals and to keep. Sort of sketches and practices can be lesser quality, but the final things are nice to know they'll last. Yes,
absolutely. I've always said to students to get themselves together as a group and apply to various paper merchants, and they may or may not be lucky to actually receive packets of good quality paper which they can use, especially if they're in their final years as at art school. And it just, once you start using that, it's like anything, once you start using a good camera or something, it's very hard to go back to a little snappy one, same with a good phone. It's very hard to click back to an old one if it's not giving you the quality that you want.
The thicker printmaking papers are so lovely to work with that it's sort of very hard to go back to the lesser quality.
Absolutely, yes. And like I said, there's lots of variety that you can experiment with. What I used to do is I used to print some of my prints, the same edition, on one paper, and then I would try it on another paper and look and see how it actually changes the image, because it does make a big difference if you're choosing a pale grey or smooth or rough, or if it's, like I said, a coated paper like cartridge, or if it's a very soft paper like Arche, then it makes a big difference.
Something I've noticed in my practice is I've worked on a lot of Ben Nicholson prints, and from different directions and different clients, but you kind of get a feel for the paper and how it will respond for conservation treatments. So it's sort of really nice to know, I know I can, make this look and preserve it in a better way. So that's...
You do find, absolutely, over the years you get that experience that what you can do with one paper and you cannot do with another. I know that to clean up a piece of Arche is much easier than if you're cleaning up a piece of Fabriano, a lovely Italian paper, but when it goes dirty, it stays dirty. So you really have to be very careful
Yes.
when working on those papers. And so, yeah, so you can get good quality rubbers, and you can rub out finger marks and, you know, pencil marks and what have you on one paper easier than others. So, yeah, it all plays a part of choosing what paper you would like to use.
Yes.
Yeah. And as artists, we all have certain favorites. There's a paper I've used called Zirkel, which is another German etching paper. It's called a white paper, but it's actually pinky white. It's really, really lovely. So it's just doesn't look bleached. It sits really well, and it's really good for color work. If you do the same image on another paper, it might look a little bit dead, but once you use color on this paper, for some reason, and I don't really know why, and I'd love to find out, that it actually retains a brighter palette. So it's lovely to use. Yeah.
Actually, I have a smoke sponge that might help with the cleaning, but we can
right.
do that
Okay,
maybe.
yes. Brilliant, absolutely.
Yes.
Well, it's great that you come from that angle, that you see work which is in a state of either disrepair or it's been used, you know, somebody has used double-sided tape
Yes.
and it's burnt through the paper.
Yes.
So it's you're seeing it from that angle,
That's how,
which is a great reminder for somebody like me who's practicing artist as well as working with other artists, is that we've got to avoid using those materials in the first place. It would save a lot of time. It's not to put you out of a job.
No, but that I would be very happy never to have to deal with sellotape again.
Yes, we've all been there. We've all done that.
Yes, because anything pressure sensitive, sellotape, masking tape, magic tape, they all discolor. They have a sort of very similar aging pattern where they first discolor and then the adhesive sinks into the paper. And then usually you get sort of a greasy mark within the paper, and then the plastic carrier fails. So eventually it'll give up whatever it's doing. But also then you're left with this greasy stain, this discolored stain, which can be difficult to remove. It makes the paper very vulnerable. And even acid-free pressure sensitive tapes, I haven't had a lot of experience with them, but I have a feeling though they might not discolor, they will stop being sticky.
Okay.
So if you, so I'd suggest the best thing is sort of the lick and stick tapes, the gum paper tapes,
Right.
the white gum paper tape, or maybe the brown, ideally the white.
And because it's reversible,
Yes.
you can do that. You can repeat that action over and again with no harm to the.
No, and also it won't discolor, and it won't cause any degradation and damage to the paper. And yes, it's easy to reverse.
That's a great tip. Absolutely, it's very inexpensive as well.
It is.
Yeah, so it's really good. You know, sometimes you get phrases they use Neshin tape, which is a pH neutral tape, but it is a pressure tape, and in time you fear it might well not do the job.
Yes, well, yes, it's just kind of the chemistry of it the nature of it will fade. That's a lot of what to do with conservation, is how things age and how they change with age, and how certainly, you know, adhesives like Pritt stick is another one that will fail. PVA is a tricky one. There's an alternative called EVA, which is slightly more conservation friendly, but it's still, I think reversibility is difficult, but it will be slightly more easier than PVA. But
you get some bookbinding special glues as well, and they're very helpful because again they're reversible, so you can actually double back. Or I knew of a bookbinder. It was from Larbert, called Valentine's, and they had the job when Edinburgh unfortunately had floods into their library. He had the job to with their expensive special collections, to take them all apart. So he was able to take all the books apart and put them all back together again. And the only ones he couldn't do were the modern coffee table books, because the paper is plastic and When it gets wet, it bonds together, and that's it. It's no way that you can separate all the papers. So all the old books where they use good quality papers and glues, that was perfectly fine. Yeah.
Yes, I see that in my practice. Is the older, usually the oldest papers are the ones that are the best, in the best quality. There's some here, because what happens with paper, with even good quality paper, if there's sort of particulates or impurities or lignin based, it's sort of foxed and you get these dark spots. And then this is one that has actual sort of metal particulates that are very clear and obvious. So there's, but unfortunately that only comes with age.
Yes.
An environment, how it's stored, and if it's in light, that'll sort of aggravate and speed up any processes.
Sure, there's a lots of outside influences, like you say, how it's stored, or if it's in a very damp windowsill or etc. I mean, it plays a part. But we've all seen paper, I'm sure, that's got foxing. We've all seen old books that might smell a little bit fusty and and have that little foxing, you know. So yes. So foxing is a term that we use for the sort of the spots of discoloration within paper, and it might be particulates within the paper fibers, or maybe particulates that were in the water that have then got into the fibers. There might also be a theory that it's sort of mold spores. So that's what foxing is, and comes in sort of varying levels. Some very dark, some less. So it can be the impurities in the water, if the paper has been in water.
Well, when it was made.
When it was made, and that's is in its life. And so over a period of time, those impurities come to the surface, or they become more visual? They
become more visual. They sort of, cause the paper around them to start degrading. And then with the kind of the oxidation process, the cellulose and the lignin discolors. So visually they become darker. These particulates might have even, because they're sort of metal, they might have come from the machine mashing the paper fibers. Because they're very much kind of within the fibers themselves.
And they've actually created holes right the way through the paper.
Yes, so it's almost like, for these, almost like rust. It sort of rusts through, and then the paper gets very weak.
Because initially I thought it was a burn mark. It looks like a burn mark with the darker discoloration and the hole right the way through the paper. But it's amazing how vulnerable it is, you know, and what special lengths are taken with certain papers. I was always told in Scotland they have a fantastic collection of Turner watercolours, and they only put them out on display in January when the light is at its weakest. And I didn't know whether that was a sort of urban myth or not, but I can well imagine that would be a better practice rather than in the middle of summer, or if it gets too much light.
Exactly. No, that is the National Galleries of Scotland. That was in their bequest. The chap that gave them, I think it was Victorian times, and they sort of realized that light was a damaging factor, and part of the bequest was they should be on display every year, but only in January at the lowest light levels.
That's great. No, it's really good that that's written in. Because, you know, some people might think it'd be lovely to put it as a box office show on in summertime. So yes, it's good.
Yes, no light levels, and displaying artworks not in full sunlight on a south-facing wall, that's will crisp your items.
Absolutely, yes. And also any work, if you're putting your work into a frame where you're going to hang it, rather than right in the middle of a spotlit piece of wall, it's very nice to put it on another wall. It won't get the direct sunlight. You're able to enjoy it that way for much longer, yes. So you were asking about inks, and the possible inks. Printmaking ink is very, very good on the whole. A lot of really good inks are out there. If you think of oil paint being 80% oil and 20% pigment, it's the other way around for inks. That's why they're so stiff. because of the amount of pigment. Unfortunately, it makes them a little bit expensive, but it's well worth getting those. And now they can come in cartridges, so you can get one of those sort of guns from B&Q, and you just squeeze out, and there's no skinning and no waste. That's very, very handy to have. There's various ones on the market, all different suppliers. I use Hawthorne Inks. There's a company in Yorkshire that make these very beautiful inks in a huge range, wide variety of colours, and they also make fluorescent inks, and yeah, inks that have little sparkly bits in them or whatever. So they do have a huge range, and it's well worth trying those. Yeah. Well, I was just going to show you, you were mentioning about Arche paper and the term water leaf. And water leaf is a term used for when a paper doesn't have any size in it. So the classic paper is blotting paper, and it's there, its job is to suck up any moisture that's going. The same with Arche 88. If I was to, you might want to get your torch on this as well. So if I put a little bit of water on this corner, you'll find that that sucks into the paper. It makes the paper sort of transparent almost in that area, and it blisters up. You can see the edge of that sort of blistering, and that's what happens to a paper like this, a water leaf paper. So with most papers, we can put them in a bath of water to make them more malleable. And so when you're printing, the paper goes into all the nooks and crannies, picks out all the ink where you want it to go. But with this one, this is the one you don't put in the water bath, because it will sink to the bottom of that tray and it would hold too much moisture. So even if you were to blot that out, there's too much, it's too wet, and too much water will resist the oil-based inks that you're printing with when it runs through the press. So you won't get a good, good impression. So it's important to know that. Years ago, people used to put their tongue, I won't do it now, but they used to put their tongue on the corner, and the moisture will be, you could tell the moisture was coming out of your tongue onto the paper, and it told you that it is a water leaf paper. So that's the nature of water leaf paper. I'll remove that water there. So there you go.
I might jump back to adhesives and tapes.
Yes.
So this was it's from a backing that something else was taken off, but the adhesive staining is what remains. And I don't think it's sellotape, but it could be sellotape staining, or it could be sort of an animal glue which discolors. But that's something to think of. They age, and I suppose animal glue is maybe not quite so used these days, but it's a sort of a similar tone to tracing paper, sellotape, masking tape. And these are some gum-based tapes that that are sort of better to use on paper, because unlike the pressure-sensitive tapes, they change with age. So there's sort of two paper. I mean, this is, I think, very common brown paper tape, and then there's the white paper tape, and then this is Tyvek tape. So it needs much less moisture, but it's sort of more like a fabric carrier. So that might be
strong.
Strong, but trickier to stick. It sort of needs much less moisture. And then this one is a linen-based tape, which again, which would be very strong. And again, you wet it.
So would you use that for something of quite a large scale? Would that be used?
No. Well, for mounting something. So I would probably use, well, ideally I would use Japanese paper and wheat starch paste. But if not, I would use probably gum paper tape. And I would stick it to the back of the object. And then when I was coming to mount it, I would then stick a sort of a T-hinge, we call them. So, and if it was large, I'd have probably a lot of tabs to mount it. And I'd also mount it just maybe if it's going to have a window mount and the edges are covered, just on the top edge, because if you stick things to all edges, paper expands and contracts with changes in temperature and environments.
So you're saying it's best to let the paper hang
Yes.
from the top, and then that gives it a little bit more
It can,
movement.
yes, it can expand and contract, whereas if it's stuck on every edge, only the center can expand and contract. And quite sometimes things sort of, they bubble up. They sort of expand so much and then there's nowhere for it to go, so it sort of goes up and wrinkles, or it gets very dry and it sort of dries and pulls very taut, which can crack and split. So depending on the thickness of the paper, you can sort of have shattered items. So yes, hanging things from a sort of a top edge allows it to move because it is sort of a natural fibre.
Yeah,
It changes.
that's great. Absolutely. Okay, so Anna, you also brought in this material, which is a sort of corrugated plastic.
Yes, like a fluted plastic. It's not conservation grade, but it's sometimes quite useful in the studio to have around. And I thought it was maybe something that artists might want to use. So this is a very new piece, and this piece has been in the studio for maybe 6 years. It's sort of been a collar for a tray, but it has never been in direct light, and it's been in very good environmental conditions. And yet, if you it sort of is splintering, so it's just disintegrating. So that's sort of a good example of something internally that has aged and doesn't age well. And it's also maybe slightly yellow.
Absolutely, and you can feel the flexibility in this one, but that is so, what's the term? It's
brittle.
Yeah, brittle, absolutely, yes.
It's very brittle.
Yeah, it's incredible how that just happens over a short period.
Few times.
Really.
Yes. Yes, I thought it was a nice sort of immediate comparison to have the two together.
Anna, it's been great having you here. It's really informative. The things that you've been saying, I've been learning a hell of a lot while you're saying. I wanted a little notebook to jot them all down, but I may be in contact with you. It's actually really helpful to know, and it's great that people can be informed by these sort of choices. As we said, gum strip, it's very inexpensive and they'll probably save a fortune, but also it protects their work for much longer. So whether it's an experienced artist or whether it's just a student starting out, it's just part and parcel that you wish them to experiment with all these different papers and with the materials, the gum strips and so on, adhesives that have been on the market. I mean, you mentioned a short while ago about the Japanese wheat starch or rice paste, which I use in bookbinding. It's always used, and there's a process in printmaking called shinkole, where you stick things on and it embeds into the print, and I always tend to use that paste. It's made up, which is very good to use.
So in conservation, we use Japanese papers a lot, and we also use wheat starch paste, which I think was used in printmaking. And we use these items, the paper and the paste, because they've been used in Japanese scroll mounting. In Japanese scroll mounting for centuries, and they work very well together, but they're also reversible. So again, they don't change with age and can be undone. So that's one of the pastes.
It is fantastic, yes.
Which is maybe a bit more of a faff to make and to store. You have to sort of boil it and then keep it in the fridge and sieve it. So for kind of immediate sticking, gum paper tapes are good, but if you want to go to slightly more lengths, wheat starch is available.
It's great. I've used it with the powder, and like you say, you boil it and you make it into a paste, and it's not dissimilar to a wallpaper paste sort of thickness. And I use an old bank card, which I scrape and scrape the excess to the outer edge, and then that piece of paper can sit with the glue facing up. And when my printmaking paper goes over the top and runs through the press, it bonds, and it bonds really well. So it's a great thing to use. So it's good that you mentioned that. It's really lovely. But thank you very much. I mean, it's been really informative.
Well,
very good.
Lovely to talk to you too. I've learned a lot as well, and you have an amazing amount of knowledge. And yeah, it's lovely.
Lovely. Thank you very
Great.
much.
Thank you.